good to see everyone here this morning. We appreciate your presence. Encourage you to be back this evening as well. We're going to start a study on God heareth not sinners tonight, so be back with us at that time. That last song that we sang, things happen in your life and with certain songs, and it always sticks with you. Well, one of them did with that song. Someone changed the wording of it at the first. Instead of time is filled with swift transition, they use time is filled with swift transgression. Every time we sing that song, that pops up in my mind. And sadly, it's true, though. There is a lot of transgression as well as transition. But we need to prevent the transgression that are in our lives and try to prevent it in others' lives as well. But there's a lot of those songs, things happen like that we always remember. Some of them good, some of them maybe not so good all the time. But there's the story of two men talking about a great satirist who had been filled with a lot of moral earnestness. And one of them said to the other, he kicked the world about as if it had been a football. The other one said, but he kicked it to a goal. When you look at the life of Paul, the Apostle Paul, who had been Saul of Tarsus, the persecutor of the church, Paul had a specific goal or a purpose to his life. When he writes at the end of his life to his son in the faith, Timothy, 2 Timothy, the 3rd chapter and verse 10, he says, but thou hast fully known my doctrine, manner of life, purpose, faith, long-suffering, charity, patience. He tells this young preacher, you have fully known my purpose. I want us to consider Paul's purpose. And really, when you go back into the wording that's used here in 2 Timothy 3 and verse 10, when he says, thou hast fully known, he is dealing with the aspect of, in fact, some might even translate it as, you have followed my, and then list these things: doctrine, manner of life, purpose, faith, long-suffering, charity, patience. And so it's not simply, you've simply known it, but you've known it with the aspect of, you've applied it to your life. You followed that, and what we want to talk about, purpose in life. And by looking at and seeing Paul's purpose in life, hopefully it's going to help us to learn about our purpose in life. When we're dealing with the aspect of one's purpose, as far as his purpose in life, we're dealing with that which a person sets before himself as to the end to be attained, his goal in life. And as we look at Paul's goal in life, Paul's purpose, be thinking about our own purpose as well, and asking if that's my purpose, if that's my goal in life. Be asking it from the standpoint of, would others consider that my goal in life? But even more so, ask it from the standpoint of God. Would God consider this my goal in life? Well, as we look at Paul and his purpose, There are a few things that we can say that Paul's purpose was not. One of those was material or goods or money. Paul, within his life, knew material goods. In fact, in Philippians, the 4th chapter, in verses 11 and verse 12, he says, "Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am therewith to be content. I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need." So Paul says, within my life, I've known both situations in life. I've been rich, I've been poor. I've had it where there's been plenty of food. I've also known when I didn't have any food, when I've been hungry. I've known those times in which I've had needs, I've suffered need, and I've known those times in which I've had all of my needs met to abound. I know both situations in life. But he says neither one of them are that important. He had learned the lesson, it doesn't matter whether you're rich or whether you're poor, whether you're full, whether you're hungry. I've learned to be content whatever state I'm in. And so his goal in life was not simply to gain money or to gain material goods. That's the goal in life of a lot of individuals, though. Even a lot of those who are Christians. Their real goal, if you look at their life, now they might not say that their goal was money, but that's what it is when you look at their life. When you make an examination of the way in which they live, the gaining of money and material goods is really what's important in their life. That's what they've set as their goal, because that is the standard of our world. Whether or not an individual is successful or a failure in life is how much he has. In fact, we have the statement, don't we? The one with the most toys wins. Well, that's the aspect of gaining money, gaining material goods. Because they think that's all that's important. And so they work all of the time. If there's overtime, they're going to be there working because they want to gain more money. If that work brings them away from God and spiritual matters, the attending of services of the church, why, I've got to get that money. I've got to make a living. I've got to buy all of these nice things for my family. I've got to make sure my family's not in want, that they don't have need of anything. And so if I have to work now and then when it conflicts with spiritual matters, why, that's not important. Why? Because they've made money and material goods their goal in life. Paul knew what the end of those things are, though, because he knew that this world and all of the things of it are going to be destroyed. Peter would write in 2 Peter 3, verses 10 and verse 11, that the day of the Lord would come as a thief in the night, in the which the heavens shall pass away with great noise, the elements shall melt with fervent heat, the earth also and the works that are therein shall be burned up. And so he asks the question then in verse 11, seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons ought you to be in all holy conversation and godliness? Notice he does not simply say, saying that these things shall be dissolved. Notice the universal statement there. Seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved. There's not going to be anything left. Then what are those riches that you gained? I guess I haven't looked lately at the richest individuals, but I guess Bill Gates is probably still the richest individual, and probably Warren Buffett, second or third. He had gone to second, and then he came back, or had gone to third, and then he went back to second. Last I looked. They gained a lot of goods within this world. When they die, what are they going to do with it? Where is it going to go? Who's going to have it then? What good is it of them, for them? Of what profit will it be when they die? 5 minutes after they're dead, what profit will all that money be? 100 years from now, what good will it do them? If 1,000 years, if we still are living in this, if this world is still existing, of what value will it be to them? And when Christ comes again, it's going to go. It's going to be dissolved. It's going to melt with fervent heat. There's not going to be anything left. Why make money your goal in life? And yet that's what we are told today by our society, that that's what it should be. Nor is fame to be was Paul's goal. It wasn't. In fact, he had plenty of fame in the Jewish religion. You go back and look at his life before becoming a Christian. He was very well known and very well respected. Galatians 1st chapter, verse 13 and 14, he describes it a little bit. When he says, "For ye have heard of my conversation in times past in the Jews' religion, how that beyond measure I persecuted the church of God, and wasted it, and profited in the Jews' religion above many my equals in mine own nation, being more exceedingly zealous of the traditions of my fathers." Here's the Jewish religion. I profited in the Jewish religion above many my equals. He was well known. He was receiving the fame that this world has to offer. In fact, if you recall when Stephen was preaching that great gospel sermon to the Sanhedrin, and they became outraged. They took Stephen out and they stoned him to death. And it says that they cast their feet at a young man's name whose name was Saul. That shows that Saul was there in control of the situation. That's how much fame and he had at that time. How well known and how advanced that he had become in the Jewish religion. That they would lay their clothes at his feet. That he was the one there giving approval for the death of Stephen. In Philippians, the 3rd chapter, verse 3 through verse 6, he says, "For we are the circumcision, which worship God in spirit and rejoice in Christ Jesus, and have no confidence in the flesh. Though I might also have confidence in the flesh. If any man think, or if any other man thinketh that he hath whereof to trust in the flesh, I more. Circumcised the 8th day, of the stock of Israel, of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews. As touching the law, a Pharisee. Concerning zeal, persecuting the church. Touching the righteousness which is in the law, blameless." He says, you think you have confidence in, would have had confidence in the flesh? To use maybe our vernacular, you ain't seen nothing yet. You're nothing in comparison to what I was. Why? Because he had received that fame in the Jewish religion. Yet that was not his goal in life. He received it, yes, but that wasn't his goal even then. But he was also willing to give all of that up in order to be a Christian. Because that was not his aim. That was not his purpose in life. Neither was popularity. I realize that in our society we are pushed and we have a desire to be popular. That is, and it seems to be even more so among young people. Be with the in crowd. Be popular. You don't want to be, one of those cast-offs where you don't have those friends and you're not in with that group of individuals that have that special feeling in school. We want to be popular. There's that desire within us to be liked by others. And to have them show their approval of us. That's the aspect of popularity. And there's that strong desire within young people to have that. There's also that same desire in older people as well. We still have that desire, and it's something that we have to combat all of the time. It's something we face all of the time. But if you look at Paul wasn't concerned with popularity. In fact, Paul received the opposite of popularity. Notice what he would write in 1 Corinthians 4, verses 12 and verse 13. And labor, working with our hands, being reviled, we bless. Being persecuted, we suffer it. Being defamed, we entreat. We are made as the filth of the earth, or of the world, and are the offscourging of all things unto this day. Paul, within his life, even though he was entreating, he was blessing, he was doing good to others, yet he was the offscourge of the world. He was defamed by them. He was persecuted by others. He wasn't seeking popularity. In fact, even among his own brethren, he wasn't all that popular at times. When he's writing to the Galatian brethren, the Galatians who had been so soon removed from the gospel of Jesus Christ into another gospel, which he says, which is not another, but there be some that trouble you and would pervert the gospel of Christ. And they had been removed from that gospel into this false gospel, this error that was being taught by the Judaizing teachers. And he, yes, condemns them. He condemns the Judaizing teachers. He shows them that we're no longer subject to the law of Moses. And then in chapter 4 and verse 16, he asks them the question, am I therefore become your enemy because I tell you the truth? His own brethren, and Paul had gone to these areas of Galatia. He had worked among them. He had converted them. He started the church there. And now then, he says, am I your enemy now? Because I'm telling you the truth. He wasn't popular among those who should have loved him the most. But he wasn't seeking popularity. He recognized that truth was more important. But Paul says here within our text, you've fully known my purpose. This word purpose is an interesting word. It comes from the Greek word prothesis. And as you examine the word itself as used by Paul, it's interesting that Paul always uses this word in relationship to God's purpose. This is the only exception to that. Every other time, it's dealing with God's purpose. And I think we can learn a lesson about Paul's purpose when we look at this word purpose from the standpoint of God. God's purpose. Because God's purpose is seen throughout history in bringing everything together for the sending of His Son. Remember what Paul would write in Galatians 4 and verse 4? That, but when the fullness of time was come, God sent forth His Son, made of a woman, made under the law. Or born of a woman, born under the law. When the fullness of time was come, Paul says. And Paul is looking back over history and he's seeing God's purpose throughout all of history. And that God was using everything within history. Everything that we might not even think of. God was using that to bringing about the perfect time for His purpose. That purpose of sending His Son into the world to die for the sins of mankind. And that God was working, not miraculously, but providentially, throughout history to bring everything together for that perfect time. We could start at Genesis' 3rd chapter. Actually, we could start in chapter 1 and chapter 2. That God's creation of man and the fellowship that God had with man. And in chapter 3 we see man committing sin. And sin separating him from God. And the curse that God placed upon man, woman, and Satan at that time. And in that curse of Satan, He gives the promise that I have a purpose, I have a plan in mind, that I am going to send my Son, and He's going to destroy your power, Satan. And through the seed of woman, He's going to crush your head, even though you're going to bruise His heel. You'll win what is seen to be a temporary victory, but what is that temporary victory in reality is your death blow. And so from their very beginning, Genesis 3 and verse 15, He starts setting forth within all of mankind and within all of history that plan and the fulfilling of that plan. And we come down, for example, to Genesis, the 12th chapter, and verses 1 through verse 3. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, and from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, into a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee, and make thy name great, and a great nation, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse him that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. There's 3 great promises here that God makes unto Abraham, or Abram at this time. I'm going to give you a land, the land promise. I'm going to make you a great nation. And third, in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. Now there's that primary purpose of God. That through your seed, someone's going to come on the scene that is going to bless all individuals. What was it? Even though God had made that promise back here to Adam and Eve, now then He's setting forth, here's this promise. And in Abraham, your seed, your descendants, I'm going to bring it about. And I'm going to, in order to bring this about, I'm going to make of you a great nation. And I'm going to give you a land. Why? For the purpose that I have in plan. The sending of my Son to die for the sins of mankind. That in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. And so what does He do? He brings them down into Egypt. How? Well, Joseph is there. And Joseph's father loves him above all of his other sons. And his other sons become jealous. And they're going to kill him. But one of them spares his life. Don't kill him. There's no need to do that. And so they sold him into slavery. God was working behind the scenes. And he goes down, he's taken down into Egypt. And while he's down in Egypt, he's elevated into Potiphar's home, to where he is next in charge, right under Potiphar himself. And what happens? Potiphar's wife comes on the scene and she lusts after him. And she tries to get him to lay with her, have relations with her. But he refuses. And one day when Potiphar's not there, she grabs hold of him and he has to leave his coat and flee from her. And so what does she do? She lies about him. And what happens to him? He's sent off in prison. God was working behind the scenes. You mean God was working and sending him to prison? Yes. God was working. For what? To fulfill his purpose. Because while he is there in prison, Pharaoh gets upset at two of his servants. And he sends them to prison. And so there they are with Joseph. And they each dream a dream. Joseph interprets the dream. One of them, you're going to be killed. The other one, you're going to be restored to Pharaoh's service. And he asks him, remember me when you are. He forgets him, though, until God sends Pharaoh a dream. And nobody can interpret it. And then this servant remembers, oh, there was this young man in prison with me. He interpreted my dreams. Maybe he can interpret yours. And so they call for Joseph. And he interprets the dream. What was he doing? God was working behind the scenes. And he interprets the dreams of Pharaoh. There's going to be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 lean years of famine. We need to get prepared for it. And Pharaoh thinks, well, who's greater to prepare for it than the one who is able to interpret the dream? And so he elevates Joseph to the second in power. God working behind the scenes. In Pharaoh's house, or in Potiphar's house, yes, to send him to prison so that he can meet those 2 servants and interpret their dreams. And he would remember him when this was going to take place. And now then he's elevated to second in command under Pharaoh himself. And they prepare for those, during those plenteous years, for those 7 lean years. And what happens during those 7 lean years? Abraham, or Joseph's father back here at home. Famine takes place. They're hungry. They need food. He tells his sons, go down to Egypt. They've got food down there. Why? Because God was working out his plan. God was working and had a purpose in mind. Go down to Egypt and buy food for us. And you know the story, how that he finally reveals himself to his brothers. And they bring all of the family down into Egypt. About 70 people. And while in Egypt, now then they're there and they have that opportunity to become a great nation, just as God had prophesied. Why? For the fulfilling of his purpose. They become that great nation. And then, when the time is right, God brings them out of Egypt. And he takes them to Mount Sinai first and gives them the law so that they would be a special people. And that law was to protect them as well, so that they would not intermingle with the other nations and destroy that seed line. And then he takes them to that land that he has prepared for them. After wandering in the wilderness for 40 years, and they go into the land. Why? So that they would have that land that was there for them, so that they could live there for God's purpose, the sending of His Son into the world. And he tells them, drive all these nations out from you. Don't allow any of them to remain there, to keep the Jewish nation separate from the other nations. And all of that to keep the purpose that God had planned. Skip down in time, and because we don't have time to go through the entirety of the history of mankind, but go down a few years later. And here's, because of Israel's sin, or Judah's sin after the nation divides. And here's 3 young men, or 4 young men, who are carried off in Babylonian captivity. In that captivity, they remain faithful to God. One of them is by the name of Daniel. And there's a dream which Nebuchadnezzar, the king, has. And so Daniel comes in and he interprets the dream. What you dreamed is you saw this image, great image, that represents 4 world empires. The first of those, King Nebuchadnezzar, is you, the Babylonian Empire. The second is the Medo-Persian, the third the Grecian, and the fourth the Roman Empire. But each one of those, God is working behind the scenes for the fulfilling of His purpose in bringing everything to the perfect point of sending His Son. When we look at Babylon, well, what had Babylon done? Babylon had come here to Jerusalem, and they had taken the Israelites and scattered them throughout the land. And God told them, you're not coming back home soon, so you worship in those lands. And what we have then, what gave rise to the synagogues. Why? So that when Christianity began, and it began to spread, they would have a place to go into and to teach the gospel to individuals, a gathering place for Jews. Why? Because God planned it way back here by having the Babylonians overtake Israel, or Judah, the southern kingdom, and to spread them out into the world. Then he tells Nebuchadnezzar, there's going to be another nation. It's a combination of 2 nations that are actually inferior to you. The Medo-Persian Empire. And with the Medo-Persian Empire, he doesn't tell us this, but what we see is that there is a respect for the law that is set forth within the Medo-Persian Empire. The law of the Medes and Persians was a law that could not be countermanded. It could not be forsaken. There was no way to change it or alter it. There was a respect for law that was built by that nation. But also, during that period of time, we have another story over here. Here's a story of, a foreign land has seemingly absolutely nothing to do with over here in Israel. One of their kings, Ahasuerus, he throws a party for his princes. And it's a drunken feast, and Ahasuerus then tells his servants, bring Vashti, my wife. I want to show her off to all of these. I want to show them her beauty. Do you realize that God was working in that request? Providentially, He was. Because Vashti had a little bit of intestinal fortitude about her, and she says, no. I'm not going to show off my body like that. I wish we had some women with some intestinal fortitude today, because they're more than happy to show off their bodies. Vashti, a heathen queen, says, absolutely not. I'm not showing off my body. Ahasuerus is angry. What shall we do to her? We'll depose her as being queen. Well, the king, he wants a queen. So what are we going to do? Well, let's find the fairest of women. And so they started looking for the fairest of women in the land. And here's a young maid by the name of Esther. She's beautiful to look at, and so she is made queen. She's a Jew, though. And here's Haman, who is high up in Ahasuerus' kingdom. Has a lot of power, and he goes into the king, and he gets the right to destroy all of the Jews. Put them to death. What would happen with God's plan and God's purpose if that was allowed to take place? God would not be able to fulfill His purpose, that in Abraham shall all of the families of the earth be blessed, if Haman over here was able to succeed. So what did he do? There's that drunken feast of Ahasuerus, and the refusal of Vashti, and the elevation of Esther, so that when the plan was set forth, here's Mordecai hears about this plan. He tells Esther about it and says, Esther, you go into the king. Who knows that thou art come to the kingdom for such time as this? And she goes in and tells about it. With the eventual result of Haman being hanged upon his own gallows that he made to destroy Mordecai. That plan that Haman had made was contrary to the purpose of God. And so God, working behind the scenes over here in this foreign country, making sure that His plan, that His purpose was going to be fulfilled. But after the Medo-Persian Empire, another nation comes up, the Grecian Empire. Under the Alexander the Great. Great warrior. And he conquers the world, but he recognizes something that our nation needs to recognize today even, that unless there is a common language, unless when people speak different languages, there's no way to hold them together as a people. And so he sends out an edict. Everyone has to learn and speak Greek. Well, if someone sent out an edict today telling me that, I know it's going to take me a lot of years to learn that language. And when I die, if it be several years from now, I still might not know that language all that well. It takes a while to implement the edict that Alexander made. In fact, it took, during that period of time, around 200 years. So that at the time of about 100 AD, or 100 BC, you have what is known then as a common Greek, Koine Greek, in which everyone spoke that same language. What God was working behind the scenes in that, providentially to fulfill the fullness of time, to send forth His Son. Later on, the Roman Empire comes to be. Romans didn't like people speaking Grecian language, Greek. They spoke Latin. So what do? Why, we're not going to have them speaking Greek. Let's make it where they have to speak Latin. And so they send out this edict. And again, it takes roughly almost 200 years for that to be fully implemented, so that at 100 AD you have the ending of that common language of Greek, and now then you have everyone speaking Latin. Why? Because God was working things together so that when He gave us His Word, the New Testament, we can know exactly what a word meant by going to that time frame. And let me use just one illustration. I know my time's up, getting late, but let me use one illustration, the Greek word solo. It's a word that we fight about in relationship to mechanical instruments and music. There are different periods of the Greek language. At one period of time, that meant plucking a carpenter's line. You know, a line that the carpenter puts up, takes it, and there's a line that's left. That's what the word meant at one time. At one time, it meant the plucking of the beard. Now, if anybody wants us to start plucking our beards in worship, you can forget it. I'm not going to do it because the word didn't mean that during the Koine period of time. At one time, it meant the plucking of a musical instrument. In the time of the Koine language, or that period, though, of New Testament Greek, it meant very simply the twanging of the vocal cords or singing. And we can go back and we can examine that word during that period of time as it's used then and know what the word means. Why? Because God was working providentially to bring up Alexander the Great to send out this edict for everyone to learn Greek. And then the Romans come to power and send out this edict and says everyone learn Latin. And during that period of time in which everyone was speaking Greek, we then have the New Testament being written for us. What was God doing? God was working behind the scenes to fulfill His purpose. And the Romans then, during that period of time, Daniel says God is going to set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And in setting up that kingdom, the Romans had brought into existence a system of transportation that was unknown of to that day and many days into the future. In fact, I'm told that some of the roads that were built at that time are still in use today. They had a transportation system where people could go into all the world to preach the gospel to every creature. What was it? God was working behind the scenes to bring everything socially, economically, religiously, culturally, every aspect of life that you can think of. God was working behind the scenes in all of history to bring about the perfect time to send His Son. And that's the word now that Paul uses with my purpose. That's the way Paul's life was. That everything in life is directed toward this one goal. Next Lord's Day morning, we'll look more at that goal and His purpose. But everything in life centered around that. Is that the way it is with you in your life? Is Christianity and obtaining heaven's home your true goal, your true purpose in life? Is pleasing God, doing His will within your life, your true purpose in your life? So that everything within your life, doesn't matter what aspect it is, everything has that one direction of pleasing God and being obedient to His will. It can't be unless you're a Christian. Upon your faith, repent of your sins, Make confession of your faith in Jesus Christ as God's Son. Be baptized in water. Why? To walk in that newness of life and have your sins taken away by the blood of Jesus Christ. But that walking in newness of life is that life of purpose, where everything within your life is dedicated to serving God. If you're a Christian but haven't been living that way, and there's public sin within your life, why not come back and make things right with God? And set your life once again to be the purpose of fulfilling God's will within your life. If you need to come, then do so as we stand and sing the invitation song.